I'm Jeffrey Brickman, and this is PlainSpoken. Every now and again, I host my United Methodist friends to talk about developments in my former denomination. I am not equipped to participate in this conversation much anymore. I'm distracted and harried, but I do still care about my former tribe, and I wish good things for them. To that end, I'm really happy to host Lonnie and Odell and Joe DiPaolo. You guys have seen them before. They're going to be talking in this time with each other. I'll ask clarifying questions, but about developments in the United Methodist Church now that disaffiliation is firmly over. There are continued lawsuits with groups of churches trying to get out, but for the most part, it's just the coalition of who's left behind and what that looks like. So to that end, I'll just have everybody on screen here for you to take in the glory of this moment. And we're going to go to Lonnie first, and then Odell second, and then Joe third, just to see what's kind of on their radar. They can ask each other clarifying questions, but just want to make sure that everything that's taking place to the best of our ability is brought out into the light and everybody understands what's going on. So with that being said, let's defer to Lonnie to start us off. What's going on, Lonnie?
Thank you very much, Jeffrey, and I appreciate your hosting us for this conversation. I also want to say a big thanks to Odell. It was his vision to call us into session. And the only thing I would add to the list of items that Odell put before us for conversation today is that word vision. The Council of Bishops, with some collaboration from others in the church, has announced that it has now got a vision before the church that hasn't been done before. They say they're acting on the mandate given to the connectional table to be the visionary body for the church. And in general terms, I don't have any problem with either having a vision for the church or having those two groups and others, whoever they chose to work with them. And that's not clear, actually, to be the instruments by which we forge a vision. However, my cautionary word on that would be to say that along with a vision, we need to have some real substantive work and not allow the vision and work toward the vision to crowd out the common everyday things that we have to do as a church, like attend to our legislative matters and to make sure that we've got the resource base in place to support work toward the vision. And to some degree, what I see right now happening is that we're substituting vision for substance, and I'm a little uncomfortable with that. That's partly out of my nature as a operational minded, linear sequential thinker and worker. So anyway, that's my opening salvo. Thank you very much, Jeffrey.
Well, if I understand what you're saying, there is administrative substantial work for bishops to be doing, and it seems odd, if not potentially unproductive, for bishops to be assuming this visioning responsibility that really doesn't seem necessarily at this point. Or did I miss what your main critique was?
Well, I think that's a bit of an exaggeration of what I said, but it's on the same track as I was heading. Yeah.
Okay. Let's look to Odell. Odell, what's the meat of the substance we should be looking at, do you think, today?
So we actually, first of all, thank you. It's good to be here. In Black Methodist for Church Renewal, we actually had that exact conversation, Lonnie. We're not opposed to the new vision, but substantively, what does that mean? And so that is the question that was raised at our last executive committee in North Georgia Black Methodist for Church Renewal. And so we're waiting to hear at annual conference how this will be lived out in terms of people. I'm not objected to anything that the new vision has stated. It just, for some in the Black Methodist for Church Renewal, there was no meat on that bone.
So anything else to be said about that topic before we move on? Okay.
But just
Well,
that
it
the new
sounds.
vision,
Go
I was
ahead.
going to say the new vision statement that I saw that they released sounds a lot like the one that the GMC released. It has very similar kind of echoes of it. I thought that was kind of striking. And my concern about these kind of things is, I think that's what leadership has to do. Leadership has to cast a vision. Leadership has to say, hey, follow me. This is what we want to become. This is where we want to go. The problem that I see is that there's a lack of trust in the leadership. And a lot of the things that they're doing in the administration of their conferences is not serving to rebuild that trust. There's still things that are being done without disclosure, without transparency. There still seem to be things happening so for example, my conference is to meet next week, annual conference, Eastern Penn. And I received guidelines about we're going to be voting on the constitutional amendments. And it said that they're not going to release the results of the vote, not at annual conference and not till November. And maybe not even after that. It's going to be up to the individual discretion of the bishops as to whether or not they release the individual conference results. Now, I think I know why. I think it's like in the national elections, they're concerned about early outcomes, influencing later votes. I get that. But it seems to me, if you want to rebuild trust, you got to be transparent with people. And so it just seems to me that they're making decisions locally that are going to cut against what they want nationally and globally, which is for people to follow their lead. That's just my view.
So there has been votes on constitutional amendments before. Do you guys recall, have these votes ever been kept confidential before, or is this a new practice?
Right. The last time I think was in 2000, in the wake of the 2012 General Conference. Wasn't that the last time we had constitutional amendments? Or was there one after that for 2016? I think it was the 2012. And they were voted down. I think almost all of them were voted down. I seem to remember that those results were released publicly.
I recall it after the 2008 General Conference.
Maybe that was
the regionalization. Regionalization is a repeat of 2008, and it was released in May 2010, and it was public. Yeah.
Is it known how? Oh, well, I can remember my question. Go ahead, Lonnie.
As a follow-up to what Joe said, that it is a concern that comes out of the fact that in the national election, for example, when we get to vote in Alaska, we already know pretty much how the election has turned out because, in New York and Florida, those votes are already announced. And there's concern about that. And I can understand the concern, but the fact is, nobody nationally is trying to suppress the vote as a result of the concern. And that's exactly what's happening here in the church.
You're saying that this practice among the bishops and conferences not immediately announcing the results of these votes on constitutional amendments is tied to, is it pretty plainly an attempt to suppress votes, or is that just a theory? Where's that clarity coming from?
It's so that the announcement of the vote in North Georgia will not have an impact on how people in California vote. There's no question about that. That's what's going on. And in my judgment, that's a suppression of information that needs to be shared when it's available.
I'm not sure I'd use the term suppression, but I think it's certainly meant to influence, or rather avoid an influence. There can be a tendency in voting where there seems to be a momentum and people kind of latch onto that. And I think the concern is that if the momentum seems to be negative, people will latch onto that. So keep it quiet. I get it. But even after all the votes are in, why make it optional?
Is it known? I mean, so there have already been some votes among other annual conferences. So is it known how other annual conferences have voted? I thought so.
I don't really. I thought that was a national. Maybe that's just my conference. No, I thought that was.
I mean, I thought Liberia was announced.
Yeah, Liberia was announced.
Huh.
So that precedent has already been broken. So is it just kind of like, okay, well, who cares about Liberia? Keep it a secret for the rest of them, or I guess.
This
All
is what I
right.
received. I'll read to you what I received from my annual conference. It says this. The annual conference will not be informed of the outcome of the vote to prevent the influence of voting outcomes of later voting annual conferences. Once the vote is taken, it will be confidentially provided to the conference secretary. The vote results will be recorded on a certificate of action and forwarded to the general conference. The vote for every annual conference will be submitted and remain confidential until all annual conferences have voted. The cumulative voting results will be announced on November 7th, 2025. And this is the final sentence. The bishop of each conference will determine whether to share the vote results of their annual conference after November 7th. Odd. Why?
So then it's given authority to each bishop to so hypothetically you can have a very checkered, some of them allow it to be released, some
Right.
of them don't. So it only makes sense to avoid doing that if you uniformly do it. Otherwise, the ones who choose to release are going to impact things more than those who don't choose to release it. It's just, wow, what a messy, ineffective measure.
And
That strikes me as very counterproductive.
And on what basis do they have the authority to keep that quiet, keep that confidential? It's the votes of annual conference. I'm not sure where they claim. Well, this gets back to my article last fall about the tyranny of the bishops. They're taking unto themselves authority. I don't think that they're afforded.
Yeah, there's no authoritative basis. I don't know how appropriate this is, but I'm going to do it anyway. I did have a petition at the last general conference that would have required that after constitutional amendments are voted on in the annual conference, that the presiding officer, almost every time a bishop, would have to announce the result of the vote at the conference publicly. That petition failed; it did not carry. But the church had an opportunity to change this and chose not to do that. So this is a decision, basically, of the whole church, that the bishops have authority, but there's no explicit place in our law that authorizes the bishop to conceal a vote like that.
And other provisions that insist upon open meetings and such suggest that we're supposed to be more transparent than this.
Precisely so.
Yeah. In 2010, they did have a list of all the annual conferences and how they voted for the regionalization amendment. So this is curious.
Well, and just functionally, I've been in a lot of groups where the results of a vote are immediately released and something was either wrong with the voting system or voters misunderstood what was going on. And because of those immediate results, they were able to take another vote and see that it went very differently once clarification was done. So it seems to me that not releasing these results until November makes it so that what Joe focused on was there's a lack of trust between bishops and the people of the UMC. And so if a number is published in November that really just doesn't seem right, there is no circling back to it and having a clarification. You can't even do like a chain of custody thing at that point. So much time has passed. You just have to take the number and work with it and trust that you haven't been lied to. And maybe everybody's more trusting than I think, but my recollection is that this regionalization thing has mostly been foisted on the people of the UMC as a top-down measure. It's not something that the grassroots was really demanding. So if they've been overtly pushing things for some time that the grassroots isn't demanding, and it just so happens that the vote went the way that they wanted to. I mean, if you're paranoid like me, it seems like, hey, constitutional amendments have been shut down before when you actually let people have more of a voice. So how about we just manufacture this thing that looks like democracy, but it's actually what the bishops want. So forgive me for being like that.
I would not suggest that the conference secretaries are going to falsify the results. I think they're going to send them in. But the appearance is the problem. The appearance is the problem. People, precisely because of what Jeffrey said, people are suspicious. They're not very trusting of these things. So it's concerning.
I heard through the grapevine that the results need to be certified by KPMG.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
But it's to me, this is just a process. We're not going to release the results until everyone has voted. This is just the process, and I believe that this was stated at the General Conference.
I did not recall that. Now, of course, what's at stake and what's on the table is that they have to get a supermajority to pass these constitutional amendments. And if they don't, as you pointed out in your article, Odell, then regionalization won't pass. And in 2028, the Africans could again, depending on how many leave between now and then, could have a majority at the General Conference and could overturn the results of the previous General Conference. So I think that's what's at stake for many of the Americans in this vote.
How realistic do you guys think it is that regionalization does not pass, given that my understanding is that more than one African annual conference has voted in favor of passing regionalization, and they were supposed to be the bulwark against. So it hasn't seemed particularly realistic to my view that America doesn't pass regionalization, but I've been wrong so many times before. What do you guys think? What are the odds?
I don't.
Because the institution is so heavily supportive of regionalization, and the church media is just full of promotional articles and arguments in favor of adopting the regionalization, and the system is setting itself up to be biased against a no vote. So I think the odds are quite high that it will pass. But nevertheless, 2/3 is still a high hurdle over which to get. So there is some chance that regionalization will fail, but it's not a very high chance right now. The probability is that the church will adopt the regionalization proposals that came out of the last General Conference.
I don't think regionalization has a snowball's chance in hell in getting 2/3 majority.
Really?
I think there's enough people who are, particularly in churches that have licensed local pastors, who are just upset at the institution, period.
Interesting.
And they will use their vote as their voice. I don't think it's going to get 2/3.
I'll be in the middle and say, I don't know.
I sure hope you're right and I'm wrong.
If recent
Which I think
stats
is
have been
bad.
done by Lewis Church Leadership Group, I forget their name. They're the only ones I remember doing this on how many churches are led by local licensed pastors versus ordained elders. You do see local licensed pastors generally being much more conservative, much more antipathetic towards the agenda of the bureaucracy of the UMC. What percentage of local, in the annual conference, it's one church, one vote for the laity. So if do we know what percentage of local churches at this point are headed up by local licensed pastors?
In some conferences, it's half or more. Our conference here in Eastern Penn, it used to be about 1/3, but I'm told it's approaching half. It may even be at half now. It's quite a few. We even have lay supplies in a number of places. We're facing a severe clergy shortage in Eastern Penn. We've been retiring. The last couple of years, we retired, I don't know, 16 or 17 people each year, and then only took in 3 or 4 each year. This year, they've not published a list of the retirees, a list that I'm on, by the way. And I was told by someone on the board that it's 25 that are retiring this year from our conference. And so we're importing people from other conferences to take churches, significant churches. We're also elevating people using more lay supplies and more local pastors. Now, do you have a sense in Georgia what the percentage of local pastors is, Odell?
I don't know the percentage, but I do know that it's high. It is high and disproportionately Black.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I could probably get a number. What are percentage of churches that are ordained pastors as opposed to licensed local pastors? Hey, if it's 50%, I wouldn't be surprised.
And on this process of voting on the constitutional amendments, the local pastors do not get to vote. And so you have a church there at the annual conference represented by a lay member and its local pastor on the clergy side, and only one of those two get to vote. So that church is half the vote of a church represented by an elder.
I had forgotten that. I know that there were certain, I know local pastors can't vote on certain matters regarding clergy and so forth, but I thought they had, over the years, they've been given more and more things they can vote on, but they're still not permitted on constitutional matters.
No, that's right. The biggest concession recently was that local pastors who finish the course of study now do get to vote on who serves as a clergy delegate to General Conference, but they did not get the voting privilege on constitutional amendments. That's still barred.
So would y'all find out well, yeah, I guess the final votes will all be announced in November, and then that's when it'll be finally known if regionalization is a reality, huh?
Mhm.
And then if Odell's right and it does get shot down, as we talked about last time, the U.S. Regional Conference has already been it was something else, but it's effectively that some of the structure has already been created, so there's still going to be disparity. Yeah, that's the equivalent of the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters, but for America.
The body was created for that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's not as though the damage is undone. There's still damage that perpetuates inequity between the regions of the UMC. It's just not formalized fully in the way that had been hoped. But it's not as though, I mean, it was already an inequitable system. It stays that way and is even a bit worse, but there's still hope for other regions exercising authority over the full body more than if regionalization passes, right?
I think you also wanted to talk a little bit about recent Judicial Council decisions, the ones from last month and also from last fall. That, again, I think doesn't further trust. When General Conference, indicated that certain protections would be in place for local churches, and then Judicial Council say, no, that's unconstitutional. Lonnie, you've written some really good stuff on this with regard to the trust clause and the use of 2549. And then also, which I think 5 or 6 conferences had indicated last year they were going to still proceed on that basis. Now they can't, because that was in the fall. And then most recently, the decision saying that trustees, the local boards of trustees of local churches cannot prohibit a pastor from conducting same-sex ceremony in their church. So these are things that, again, doors keep closing that people were told would remain open so that folks could follow their conscience at the local level.
When we talked about 2549 and the Dakotas Conference and the Judicial Council decision on that a couple of weeks ago, but there have been several decisions. And then, Lonnie, I know that you have opinions on particularly the Judicial Council reversing decisions that were made just a year ago. So what direction do you think would be good to go with all that?
Well, it's such a multifaceted thing. It's hard to know just exactly which is the right way to start on talking about something like that. But the 2 decisions that were at play here. One is Judicial Council 1503, which was tendered to the church last October. No, I'm sorry. It was at the General Conference. I go back a couple of sessions of the General Conference to get to that one. At the General Conference, a question was asked if the Board of Trustees had authority to prohibit the local church. This is the Board of Trustees of a local church. If they had the authority to bar the conduct of same-sex unions in that church. And the reason I came up was that promises were made by the supporters of all the changes that were being made relative to human sexuality. If the local option there was still valid, and overwhelmingly the response from those folks who were most supportive of all these changes was that yes, nobody's going to force the local church to host same-sex unions if they don't want to do that. The Board of Trustees of the church could make that decision. And somebody asked a question of the Judicial Council during the General Conference, and the Judicial Council came back with that decision saying there's nothing in the Book of Discipline that would prohibit a board of trustees from taking such action. Well, anybody who's been paying attention to church law and studied it at all knew that was wrong. That the provision in the Book of Discipline, which has been there forever, that says that the person, the decisions about what religious services can be offered in a local church is a decision of the pastor, the appointed leadership, the pastoral leadership there. And that didn't change. That was not changed. And despite that, the Judicial Council said nothing in there prohibits this board of trustees from doing that. And like I say, anybody who's been paying attention knew that was wrong. That just could not withstand any kind of judgment. And so at the most recent session of the Judicial Council, they were asked to decide if that was the right decision, 1503. And they came out with another decision, 1516, out of this most recent session. And it was the least definitive statement that I think the Judicial Council might have ever made. And they've made some doozies before, but this one may be at the top of the cake. They sort of said that Judicial Council decision 1503 was decided in error, but they never reversed it. And in fact said, a sort of paraphrasing here, the decision still stands, but nevertheless, a pastor has the right to decide what marriages are conducted, not the Board of Trustees. So we've got a decision that, on one hand, that says the Board of Trustees can make a decision like that, and another decision says, well, probably not, although it waffles enough that you get whiplash. And so within 1 year, the Judicial Council has had 2 shots at this, and the church is still a bit, it seems to me, in a muddle about what the real fact is here. And if, in fact, the Judicial Council's most recent action is the determinant here, the pastor will remain, as pastor has always been, in charge of conducting and deciding on the conduct of religious services, and weddings are religious services. There isn't any other reason for the church to be involved in that process other than religiously. Like I say, whiplash. The church is one way and then another in a year.
And for practical reasons, for why this matters, this very much mirrors in some ways the larger culture war that's been going on for a while, where, when gay marriage was being defended publicly, one of the rhetorical things was, if you don't like gay marriage, fine, don't get gay married. It has nothing to do with you, And similarly, within the UMC, it's been, okay, if you local churches don't like gay marriage, fine. You don't have to have gay marriage going on in your church. You don't have to be paying, none of your money needs to be going to maintaining this facility that's being used for something that you think isn't good. Taylor Watson Burton Edwards published a piece, 9 months ago saying as much, mirroring this language you're talking about. But to be on the right side of history, you have to be complicit, or you have to participate in being on the right page of history. So it was determined, okay, it was beneficial for us to convince local churches that they had some free will here. They could choose whether or not to participate. But actually, if we're collectively going to be on the right side of history, then this needs to be a compulsory thing. So how about we elevate all of the liberal clergy, we filter out all of the clergy that are not willing to do gay marriage, and then we give them sole responsibility and right to do that, and the churches just have to come along kicking and screaming. That seems to...
And the prohibitive language was a lie from the beginning, and still a lie, so that the churches can be required, if their pastor chooses to do that, to host these same-sex unions. And procedurally, there's a really big issue here. The General Conference asks the Judicial Council to decide things so that the General Conference can use the answer to guide it in its work going forward. as well as to know whether or not what they just did is legal or not and has to be changed. And when the Judicial Council comes back with an erroneous decision like it did in 1503, the General Conference's work is impaired by that process. And that's really a problem for the church, whether you support same-sex unions or not. That is, in fact, in my judgment, less of an issue than whether or not you can rely on decisions of the Judicial Council to guide the General Conference into work. That's a big deal.
I remember the voting process for constituting the new Judicial Council at the last General Conference. I remember a lot of the rhetoric on the floor of the General Conference, and it was very replete with not language indicating that the people that they nominated these positions are especially erudite in legal stuff, judiciary stuff. It was more that they represented certain constituencies that are cared about within the UMC. And my interpretation at that time, I don't remember the particulars. I just remember thinking, oh, they're not putting their best people on this. Rather, they're just constituting this group based on what larger group that they represent. And so partly as I've read the Judicial Council decisions released since then, I've just been pleased that the grammar makes sense, and that I kind of expected it to be a bit ridiculous now. And of course, the decisions they're reaching seem ridiculous because they're kind of incoherent and they destabilize the whole denomination. But, they were already voting in lockstep with whatever the episcopacy wanted before. And so what's to be said for this being a win? Hey, at least they are getting their grammar correct, and they're not making a farce of the denomination in that way. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a positive spin on this.
I think this is the reason why regionalization is going to be defeated, because people see the handwriting on the wall, and that there is an attempt to consolidate power in the United Methodist Church around the bishops and consolidate power around the agencies. And this leaves out the local church and the lay people. And so that's the reason why I primarily believe that regionalization is not going to pass, because I think people see right through this.
When it comes time for the voting, people think differently than they do in the abstract. If you poll folks who are going to be the voters at General Conference about who should be elected to the Judicial Council, the overwhelmingly, I suspect they would say somebody who's fair, can evaluate the evidence, and vote the way the facts before the body would suggest the decision be made. But when it comes time actually to vote, what's going to drive the vote is ideology. The voters are going to vote for people they think will decide the issues the way they want them decided. So that's how we end up with an ideologically driven council.
I also think that you're going to, one of the reasons I tend to lean more towards Lonnie's assessment of the likelihood of it passing is that a lot of the more conservative folks have left, and anecdotally, I don't have numbers, a lot of people I know said they're not even going to bother going to annual conference, which means they're not going to be there to vote. So I think you're going to have more of the more progressive leaning folks who are voting. So and of course it's the 2/3 majority of those present and voting, not those who could be there.
That's accurate.
So and I think that's another piece of all this is that the exodus is continuing. I mean, the big announcement that the era of disaffiliation is over, but that's nice that they say that, but people are seeking other means. They've closed the door on 2449, but there's at least a dozen lawsuits going on across the country. And some of them are now moving towards resolution. I know in my own conference in Eastern Penn, of our approximately 375 churches, 50 or so are in a lawsuit. And most recently, the judge has given the green light to go to trial. And the conference has been trying to forestall that, but we don't have a date yet. And the latest move apparently was for the conference to petition for the judge to do a bench trial rather than a jury trial. Conference does not want a jury trial. Well, that makes sense.
It
Jury's
does
likely
make
to
sense.
the jury's more likely to sympathize with the local church than the big bad, bishop. But that's probably going to be sometime later this year. And Maryland, the case in Maryland, the judge in the case dismissed the case, told the churches that it's over, but then it was revealed that the judge is an active United Methodist layman. So they're appealing that to the Supreme Court based on conflict of interest, is my understanding anyway.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things are rolling through. Then there are churches that, and I know of a number of churches where they did not make any attempt to disaffiliate or leave or participate in the lawsuit because they were hoping to be allowed to continue to function in accordance with what they believe, being more on the conservative side. But those are the ones that now are going to start thinking, well, wait a minute. How are we going to be allowed now to continue to function according to our own convictions and culture? So they will then have, I think, some impetus to seek a way out. So I don't think the exodus is over. And
I did an interview with David Gibbs, the third of the National Center for Life and Liberty, who is representing many of these groups of churches, including the suit in Eastern Pennsylvania. And for those who are interested to know more details about the jurisprudence around that and the shaky trust law that the UMC is built upon, you might look that up. Lonnie, I think you were going to go on from there.
Oh, I do have one comment that, the annual conferences have at least two motivations to move towards settlement of these cases. One is, of course, the financial incentive is strong. They can save money by negotiating and settling without a trial. And so when it looks like a trial is imminent, the pressure is on higher. But there's another incentive too, and I think it was a big factor in some of the cases that have already settled. The annual conferences are pretty intimidated, and rightfully so, by the discovery process that is involved in going to trial. There's a lot of stuff that goes on that they don't want known widely, which will come out in discovery. And so the incentive to avoid that revelation is going to be really high too.
I'm a big fan of discovery.
You bet.
I would say that I hear what Joe is saying, and I've heard that repeatedly. And to me, if you're a church and you're seeking to get out, I don't understand why you wouldn't show up to annual conference. As a matter of fact, you are compelled to show up to annual conference and vote against what the organization is trying to push, because you're trying to make your point that we will not be bullied by the annual conference towards regionalization or anything else. So for churches that have a licensed local pastor, I know that there's a push nationwide to get those churches, those lay members of those churches to annual conference and to be seated for this vote on regionalization, as well as ballot measure number 4. So I think there's a underground grassroots movement of people who will be at annual conference seated to vote no or vote in their interest, whatever their interest may be. And to me, it makes no sense for people not to show up to annual conference just to allow the organization to do what the organization does. This is not a top-down CEO model that we have in the United Methodist Church. We have equal voice, equal vote as lay members of the church. And for you to give up that vote is just idiotic.
I don't disagree with you, Odell. I just think that the emotional impact on a lot of people has been such that they just don't want to be there.
And the big factor here, in my judgment, guys, is the retired elders. They're full members in full connection of the annual conference, and they have full vote on all matters before the conference, including constitutional amendments. And many, many of them are now saying exactly what Joe is saying. They're just, why should I go? And they don't have the same mandate to attend that an active elder does. When you're retired, you can do whatever you want. Then there's no penalty.
Well, at least within the Oklahoma annual conference where I was, the retired clergy generally, I mean, you would think Oklahoma would be conservative. You'd think that older folks would be conservative. They were more liberal than almost any constituency. So I don't really know where the retired clergy stand when you look on the average around the denomination in the U.S. Lonnie, is it your impression that they are generally more conservative than the UMC bureaucracy?
Yeah, and my analysis basically is based on the fact that they're just older, and older people tend to be more conservative than younger people. And many of them are fed up with it, and they're just not going to go.
Y'all brought up briefly the new mission statement, vision statement, I don't know, and briefly hit on it. It looks a lot like the GMC's one. For people who haven't looked at it, it's three phrases that end in an adverb. The 2-word phrases that end in an adverb. It's exactly the same structure as the Global Methodist Church was. Do I remember what the Global Church one? No. I got so turned off to the whole thing by open hearts, open minds, open doors, which was a marketing strategy in the UMC that was such a pain in the butt all the way along, because it's just, it means nothing. And so like the adverb 3, it just feels like marketing. It feels like empty aspirational marketing to me. So I was kind of embarrassed for the GMC when we adopted it. And then I'm even more embarrassed for the UMC in mimicking it. It just feels kind of banal to me. But I don't know. Are people in the UMC just gung-ho about the new mission statement?
No.
I haven't heard a lot. I have the UMC mission statement pulled up. I can read it. If you could pull up the GMC, we could read them both and let folks hear it. Someone want to pull that up? Here's the UMC. United Methodist Church forms disciples of Jesus Christ who, empowered by the Holy Spirit, love boldly, serve joyfully, and lead courageously in local communities and worldwide connections. That's the new UMC thing proposed by the bishops. Does anybody have the GMC one?
It's so they changed it to our vision,
right?
But it was our mission statement. But then at our general conference, we got an actual decent one, which is to spread scriptural holiness across the globe, which mirrors the original Methodist. Yeah, we did good on that. So we changed our old mission statement to our vision, which is worship passionately, love extravagantly, witness boldly.
Yeah, so they echo one another. They're not identical, but there's a similar feel, similar ring. Interesting.
Well, I don't know if you guys remember Simple Church. It was all the church gurus were pushing this thing 15 years ago, and it was all about have a 3-word marketing structure for your church that just becomes your identity. And if you just simplify your church and you have the 3 little words and you put it on banners all over the place, then this will be the sign of your church turning around. And the whole thing just feels so silly to me. But I guess the bishops still think that's what church growth is about.
I think having a vision is good. I know here in our local church, we embraced the new vision statement. I've been here 10 years. I mentioned I'm retiring in a month. And I guess it was my first or second year we invested in vision statement, become a central hub of Christian ministry in Lancaster. And people lived into it big time. This church is hopping 7 days a week. They really did. They really lived into it. But I think to live into a vision statement gets back to the issue of you got to have people follow that leadership, not just the pastor, but also the lay leadership. I guess the analogy for the denomination would be the agencies. And that requires, they believe in those folks. They trust in those folks. That's the piece that's lacking to me. But I think a good vision statement is a good thing, but it's no substitute for people and relationships and trust.
Absolutely. We haven't yet found a way to improve on the one that Jesus gave when he said, "A new command I give you, that you love one another."
Go make disciples of all nations. Yeah.
I want to transition the conversation to the General Conference, which was supposed to be held in Harare, Zimbabwe in 2028. And then it was announced this week it will be held in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I have some problems with that. I don't understand how For example, last on April 30th, the Global Methodist Church announced that their 2026 General Conference will be in Johannesburg, South Africa. And the United Methodist Church can't figure out how to hold a conference in Harare in 2028. And I've heard some things about Zimbabwe. Originally in 2015, Robert Mugabe, the president of Zimbabwe, was alive, and there was some pushback from liberals in the United States because of the LGBT stance of the Zimbabwean government. And now there's some things that I'm hearing about Zimbabwe as it relates to their political stability and whether that conference could actually be held at the University of Zimbabwe or at Africa University, which is fine and good. We can go to Johannesburg too in 2028, or we could have that conference in Nairobi. I think that having the conference in Minneapolis is another attempt to consolidate power in the United States around the bishops, around the agencies, and around mainstream UMC, so that those of us who are outside of those organizations have to live with the, first of all, I think it's very neo-colonialist to have the conference again in the United States. And I think this is more anti-African sentiment that we can't figure out how to hold a conference outside the United States in the United Methodist Church. And for those of us in the United States who are outside of the agencies, the bishops, outside of mainstream UMC, it will further just alienate churches that we're continuing to have to be subjected to certain parts of the church and at general conference. Let's be honest. The reason why we have not gotten rid of jurisdictional conferences is that it benefits the Western jurisdiction, which is the smallest jurisdiction in the United Methodist Church. And they have an outsized role in the United Methodist Church because of the jurisdictional system.
The
So
Western jurisdiction is smaller than some of our annual conferences, yours among them.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So to me, it's just, we're going to go to Minneapolis and it'll be more of the same America First theology that was on display in Charlotte.
Well, to what extent? I mean, it was supposed to be in Zimbabwe. I mean, in the last month or two, the Zimbabwe conferences are now coming apart in Zimbabwe. There's defections of leaders and churches. So I did not see the report on that, but I imagine that had something to do with whether or not they think that conference now can host it. I would imagine. But and what that shows is that the turmoil that the U.S. went through in 2022 and 23, with conferences leaving, splitting, churches splitting, and so forth, as everyone predicted, by not allowing the African churches to participate in 2553 at the time, that just simply deferred that same dynamic unfolding in Africa, and that's what's happening now. So you see it in Liberia, you see it in Zimbabwe, you see it in Congo, you see it in Nigeria. You're seeing the churches are leaving, people are leaving. In some cases, there's violence. It's horrendous what's going on. So I
Well, if
imagine
you want to talk about Zimbabwe in particular, remember Simon Mafunda's from Zimbabwe. He now works for the GMC. But also Forbes Matanga is from Zimbabwe. We interviewed him on Considering Charlotte, I don't know, a year and a half ago.
right.
Man, we've spent some time together. But he was running for bishop, and then eventually the institution chose another person that they imagined would be more friendly to them. And so Forbes Matanga exited, as well as with many people who were aligned with him. But I got a hold of a video last week with the new bishop. His name is escaping me, given a real, I mean, by American liberal standards, homophobic sermon just a couple weeks ago, saying that gay people are satanically possessed and mentally deranged and will have no place in his church. Very firm, very clear speech. And so I can't help but wonder if maybe the institution felt him out and saw that maybe he wasn't the friendly person that they wanted, and that this could be kind of a more interpersonal bickering sort of thing.
Well, I've seen that video also. The bishop is Gift Machinga. And it was just very interesting to see, first of all, no surprise that is par for the course in Zimbabwe. But Lloyd Nyarota also ran for bishop, who was the leader of the United Methodist Africa Forum. And he also lost, and this is in the Zimbabwe West Annual Conference. And it just shows the reach of, let's say, mainstream UMC overseas, because they were, my understanding through the grapevine, they were funding United Methodist Africa Forum, which is this upstart organization that was founded after the special session of the General Conference, in reaction to the special session of the General Conference, in opposition to Africa Initiative, and what seems to be a colonialist divide and conquer scheme to split the African vote. And now United Methodist Africa Forum, you haven't heard anything from them recently, but Gift Machinga is the new bishop. And, I've heard some of the same kind of rhetoric coming out of Liberia with their bishop, even though, and the
Choir.
Bishop Choir, or let me not state the bishop, members of the Liberia Annual Conference, who released a video denouncing same-sex marriage in the United Methodist Church. And this is after Jerry Kula left the United Methodist Church. So there's still this anti-LGBT sentiment on the African continent, and I don't think that's going to change.
Well, and that's what regionalism was designed to anticipate, so that these Africans could keep their hands clean of these Americans that are embracing this Western sexual ethic. And so there could still be some money. There's still shared authority, which seems to be something that, Lonnie has called attention to, but nobody seems to be able to care about, even though it really matters. But yeah, the regionalization was supposed to help everybody have their cake and eat it too. And
however, there will be no Africans there's no Africans in charge of any of the agencies of the United Methodist Church right now.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're looking at the boards, the agencies of the the only African who is head of anything in the United Methodist Church is Bishop Mande Mayambo, who's head of the connectional table. There's no plan. I don't see how regionalization is going to put an African in charge of the General Board of Global Missions or Global Ministries. I'm sorry. I just don't see how regionalization is going to help put Africans in leadership roles in the United Methodist Church outside of their own individual conference. This just makes no sense to me. And I believe it's just neo-colonialism.
Having an African preside over the connectional table doesn't negate what you said about no African in charge of an agency, because the connectional table is not an agency.
Right. That's very interesting what you said about that video. I had not seen or heard of that video of the Bishop of Zimbabwe making this. That might explain a lot, because as the host bishop, he would be in a position to make statements at General Conference that would be embarrassing to the church. I'm reminded of an experience I had many years ago. I went to Korea in 2006 for the World Methodist Conference. It was held in the largest Methodist church in the world in Seoul. And now this was all different Methodist denominations coming together, but the head of that church decided to preach a gospel sermon to ostensibly all, believers, Methodist believers. He was making sure that he wanted to make a statement. He wasn't so convinced of the rest of us, and he wanted to let us kind of have it. And I wonder if that might be what they're concerned about. The host conference usually gets airtime and floor time. So interesting.
We've only got a couple minutes left. Did we cover everything?
Well, meanwhile, here in North Georgia, we have an invitation to the Atlanta Pride Parade. Some of the churches have decided to extend an invitation. About 10 churches in the city of Atlanta have decided to extend an invitation to the Atlanta Pride Parade, which will be held in October, to the rest of the North Georgia Annual Conference. And this is something the previous bishop and some folks marched in the Atlanta Pride Parade several years ago. So it is creating some little waves here in North Georgia, and suffice to say, a lot of people will not be going to the Atlanta Pride Parade. It's just very interesting how we are, where we're centering our gospel. It is very, very interesting, because as I'm looking around, and Black churches are very, very careful of what they say publicly. But as I'm looking around here in Atlanta, 2819 Church is growing by leaps and bounds. The Passion City Church is here in Atlanta. Buckhead Church is here in Atlanta. It is, I mean, we have some major churches, and some of our Methodist churches in the city of Atlanta are struggling, and they're losing members, and they're losing the members to churches that are not preaching a message of that inclusion is anything other than what Scripture says it is.
That silence speaks for itself, maybe. Well, listen, I'm sure there's a ton more that we could talk about, but keeping all this stuff from getting too jumbled is quite a thing. So maybe we've hit our limit for today. Who knows when we'll be back at it again? I just know that the ground is always shifting, and there are bigger principles at play and a lot of history to keep in mind. But man, it's a fool's errand to try and figure out how all this is going to transpire. I mean, if you told me, some things don't surprise me. Actually, you know what? If you'd talked to me a year ago and said, the Judicial Council is going to make schizophrenic decisions in order to accommodate the thing, and they're going to throw all their weight behind gay pride parades, and the Black church isn't necessarily going to be on board with that, and they're going to adopt a crazy a mission statement that very much resembles the Global Methodist Church, and the episcopacy is going to continue to operate in ways that are disconnected from the grassroots, and the people at the grassroots are going to just decide that their vote doesn't count and stop showing up. Like, none of these things would have surprised me a year ago. So it's, unfortunately, a lot of developments, I would say pretty much, yeah, if you told me for all this talk of globalization or regionalization or respecting Africans, they're going to cancel Zimbabwe, I would have been like, yeah, I mean, I would have put money on that a year ago, to be frank. So it's not a surprising thing when stereotypes hold, but it is a disappointing thing whenever, well, Maya Angelou, I don't agree with everything, but she said, when people tell you who they are, you believe them. And that's who the institution announced themselves to me to be a long time ago. That's why I left. And then when they continue to behave in the same way without really a concern for how it looks even, it's not surprising, it is disappointing. I still hope I'm wrong. Any closing thoughts from any of you guys?
No, thank you for inviting me to come back on. It's been fun.
I do have one closing thought.
Please.
And that is, I want to make sure that I apologize to everyone who that I didn't author the petition at General Conference to submit asking for the disbandment of the jurisdictional conferences. That was something that I spoke out against at the 2022 Southeastern Jurisdiction Conference, and made a speech against jurisdictional conferences at the General Conference. But I should have done more than speeches. I should have put pen to paper and submitted a petition to have jurisdictional conferences removed, because I'm not Marilyn Monroe, so don't blow wind up my skirt. There is no movement. There's rhetoric. The One Church plan had a lot of institutional push. There were videos. There was articles written about the one church plan, regionalization, the same thing. I've seen nothing on jurisdictional conferences being removed. And to me, that is a problem. And so I do apologize to the church for not authoring that petition.
I had a petition, but the Alaska Conference supported a petition I wrote that would have done that, but it was disallowed on a procedural matter.
I remember
so it
that,
never
yeah.
reached the floor.
Woulda, coulda, shoulda.
All right.
Well, friends, this has been another Considering Charlotte. Just want to thank Lonnie and Odell and Joe for making the time, and may this be a blessing to those of you still in the United Methodist Church, and may the Lord glorify himself with whatever comes of all this. So we'll see y'all next time.